In this demonstration, we're going to go over how to perform the lift and shift method. The lift and shift method refers to a cloud migration strategy in which an organization moves its existing applications and infrastructure to the cloud without making significant changes to the underlying architecture or design. This method is sometimes called hosting or lift in place and involves taking an application or workload that is currently running on-premise or in a traditional data center environment and moving it to the cloud-based infrastructure such as AWS, Microsoft Azure, or Google Cloud Platform. The lift and shift approach can be faster and less complex than other migration strategies because it avoids the needs for significant changes to the application infrastructure. However, it might not be the most efficient or cost-effective method as it does not take advantage of the cloud-native features and capabilities that can help to optimize performance, scalability, and cost efficiency. But in this example, we're not going to make any changes to it whatsoever. We will simply export our existing CentOS 7 VM to AWS and use the command line to integrate it into Amazon Machine Image or AMI. And that's a service that will help us prepare for use in the AWS environment. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but the first thing we want to do is we want to export the CentOS 7 mini clone. So we're going to go export here. And we're just going to keep it in this particular format. And we're going to also include the ISO image associated with this. And we're just going to click next, finish. And it's going to start writing to the appliance. And that simply means it's just converting it to an OVA file, getting it ready so we can transport it to AWS. An OVA file is a pre-built virtual machine image, and it contains all the necessary settings, software, and operating system to run the VM. It's like a package application that can be easily imported and ran within a new virtual environment, such as VMware or VirtualBox. But in our case, we're going to be running it in the AWS cloud environment. After logging into the AWS platform, you will arrive at the AWS Management Console. Next, we need to upload our OVA file in the AWS S3 bucket, which is just a storage container used in our AWS cloud environment. If you don't already have an S3 bucket, that will be something you need to configure, which is pretty simple. Now, more than likely, you're not going to have the S3 service already pinned to your home. So you just simply go to View All Services, and it's going to be right here, the storage section X3. All right, so like I said earlier, I already have a bucket configured. So this is one I would like to use, this middle one. And I'm going to simply upload the OVA file that I created earlier. Add files here. Scroll down, click upload. Shouldn't take too long. It's not a huge file, but I'll come back to you when it's finished. And voila, we have a successful upload. Well, it wasn't that impressive, but oh well. The next steps will be a little complex for beginners because there are a few prerequisites required that will need to be accomplished. I will show you a few of the files that need to be configured and what they look like for general exposure, but a detailed explanation will be beyond the scope of this video. So, next thing we're going to do is we're going to enter into Amazon's web-based cloud shell. And I'm going to open it into a new tab. An AWS Cloud Shell is a web-based shell environment that provides access to a command line interface for managing AWS resources. It's like having a little Linux terminal directly in your web browser. Now, the good thing about the AWS Cloud Shell is that it provides a pre-configured environment with common command line tools and AWS software development kits already installed, so you don't have to install them yourself. And it's going to be used to create and manage EC2 instances, S3 buckets, and setting up security policies. Now, it's simply a convenient way to manage your AWS resources without having to set up your own environment and install any additional software. Now, as promised earlier, I told you there's going to be a few files that we're going to need in order to successfully complete this migration. And we're going to list it out really quick. Okay. Now, this first file is going to be our private key, which is required when we want to connect SSH. Now, when we do SSH, it's going to use the PKI encryption method so that we can securely connect to our instance. The next file we're going to need is a containers.json file, and that's simply going to contain a short description of where the file is located, the OVA file, for an instance to be created. The role policy file is going to be used to create certain restrictions and permissions for a VM import service role that we're going to need to perform this migration action. And the trust policy is just going to further allow that VM import service role to perform actions on our behalf. Now, just to get a little preview of what these things look like. Now, typically, you're not going to show anyone your private key ever. It's something that should be secured at all times, but I'll show this to you because this particular instance is deleted, and I'm going to no longer need this particular private key. If you look at the Far left, those strings, the dashes, the R's, the W's, that's going to determine the level of permissions for each one of these files. You will see that it's slightly different for the private key file, which is the first one at the top. This permission is set so that I can only read it. Only the owner of the particular file can read this because it's such a sensitive file, and AWS is a secure environment, and it's required to have that file set up in that particular way. Now let's look what that key looks like. This is what a private key looks like. It's just a long string of numbers and characters. Again, it's very complex and it's used for encryption. Never show anyone your private key, which I'm doing now, but I'm gonna get rid of it so it's not any use for me. Let's go over what this container file looks like. It's a simple file with simple instructions, letting AWS know where to look for the particular OVA file. Now do the role policy. As said earlier, this just describes the type of permissions, restrictions, and other information used for our service role that will allow us to transfer our OVA file and convert it to an instance that AWS can use. And last is going to be the trust policy file. And again, this just allows that role to take actions on our behalf. It's going to be beyond the scope of this particular demonstration to go through all these things, but just know there's going to be more required than just typing in the commands I'm going to give you. We will use the following command to import the image. Now, based on this output, if you look at the bottom, the status means that it's active and the message saying that it's pending. When it's complete, the status message will change to completed. Now, this could take a few minutes, so I'll get back to you once it's complete. Okay, I am back. If you look at the bottom, you'll see the status is showing completed. Now, in order to see this particular status, you have to run this AWS EC2 describe command, because it's not going to automatically pop it up once it's complete. One thing to keep in mind, if you're following me closely, between the time period when the command executed and when it completed, there was an error, and the error had everything to do with just this S3 key right here. When I uploaded the file, it had a space in the name. So just make sure whenever you're trying to do a migration process, make sure your name in your S3 object bucket does not contain any spaces. For some reason, AWS is not going to like it. It will allow you to upload it with that particular name convention, but when you have to actually execute on that name convention, make sure there's no spaces. Next thing we need to do is go to our AMI services. So we'll simply click here. We'll go to EC2. This is the management console for that. And to the left, we'll see the images and we're going to AMIs. This is the one we just created. At this point, we're going to create an instance of this image. An image is nothing more than a blueprint for any additional service that we want to create. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to click this right here. I'm going to launch instance for AMI. I'm just going to name it my CentOS minimum. What is that? Now, as mentioned earlier, we're going to have to create a key pair to log in. So we're going to create a new key pair here. And I'm just going to name it CentOS 7. We're going to name it -in -alone. All right. Now you see it just downloaded the .pim file. That's going to be the private key that we're going to need to connect to the server. All right, we're going to launch this instance. Okay, and we're on our way. Next thing we're going to do is actually connect to our instance using our SSH terminal. So if you click connect to instance, it's going to give us a few options here. Now we're going to focus on the SSH client, and this is going to allow us to connect from any terminal, as long as we have that key. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to copy this command, upload the new key, and then try to connect. So I'm going to copy this, go back to our instance in a new window, upload a new file, and I'm just going to select the .pim file that we just downloaded. Upload that here. Okay, that was successful. Next, we're going to paste that command. Press enter. Say yes. Now I'll just enter the password that was the root password for the initial instance of the clone when we had it on VirtualBox. Now if we look here, we can see that we are in the old virtual machine. Now I can change here to my old username, showing that we have successfully lifted and shifted our virtual machine from VirtualBox and put it into our AWS environment. All right, that's the end of this demonstration. We started in VirtualBox and we converted our CentOS 7 machine to an OVA file, and then we moved it into our AWS environment. Now, it was a lot of steps in between, but we didn't manipulate the underlying virtual machine. So that's a lift and shift method.